Hi, folks. My name is Eric Arnzen. Greetings from the Green Mountain state of Vermont. I hope everybody is well. Today, I will be presenting on Chapter 5, Forgiveness, from the Psychology of Emotion in Restorative Practice. I chose this chapter, Forgiveness, because I can relate to this in a big way. I have experienced the power of forgiving others, and just as important, I've experienced the power of forgiving myself for mistakes that I've made. You can see here the learning objectives that are posted. And this presentation will be delivered in the format of a story about Katie Hutchinson and her restorative journey through the murder of her husband and the power of forgiveness for herself before anyone else. Accompanying this story is a PowerPoint presentation that highlights important points of consideration that support our learning objectives. So first, I will kind of begin here. So in 1999, Katie Hutchinson's neighbors had gone out of town on vacation. Their son remained home and decided to throw a house party while his parents were away. Around 200 young people were at the party, and things soon got out of control. Katie's husband, Bob McIntosh, went to the home in an attempt to break up the party and was brutally attacked and kicked to death. Not one person who attended the party would step up and give the police any information about who was responsible. Not only was Katie left without her husband, but their two 5-year-old twins without a dad. As Katie stood in the emergency room, watching as doctors attempted to resuscitate her husband, she experienced the stimulus of the chaos. And as described by Vernon Kelly in chapter 1 of the same text, things were too big, too loud, and too fast. As she was told that her husband was dead, she experienced an automatic controlled response. My children, I need to go home and be with my children. Katie became focused on what she needed to do to get past the traumatic scene and maintain a sense of control. Following the traumatic event, distress, anger, and shame effects were triggered for her and her children. They engaged in counseling efforts and underwent eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is a continual triggering of the positive affect of interest by use of stimulus, touch, light, and sound that alternates to engage the right and left side of brain. This allows the traumatized person to contact and connect their negative emotions that might otherwise be suppressed without becoming overwhelmed. Most importantly, Katie, along with her children, needed to know that whoever killed her husband was going to be okay. She wanted to know how the community failed him. Katie states that somewhere in my community was a woman tossing and turning in her bed because something had happened to her child. She knew her son's behavior hadn't been right since the night of the murder. Katie also knew that there was nothing she could do about what happened to her husband, so she turned her energy into creating as much stability and normalcy for her children as possible. Because she had the benefit of understanding affect script psychology, she became empathetic for those around her that were experiencing the shame generated by the fear and helplessness of her husband's murder. During her earlier life, Katie observed her mother manage fear and anger to her father's diagnosis of cancer by shame avoidance behaviors and using alcohol. She was determined not to find herself in a similar position. For months, she was consumed with managing the negative affects of fear, anger, and shame. She learned to let her grief wash over her, learned to be gentle with herself. She fell in love again, experiencing excitement and joy for the first time in a long time. Katie began to start a new life. She left the community that she lived in, and she accepted her new love's proposal. She nurtured her children, although they struggled with sadness that at times turned into anger, were also eager to recreate a two-parent family. Katie and her children still needed to know what happened that night that they lost Bob, Katie's husband, and their children's father. Following a 5-year undercover investigation, an officer called Katie, and informed her that a young man named Ryan Aldridge was charged with the murder of her husband. Katie was overwhelmed by the need to participate in what justice was going to look like. She wanted to look into Ryan's eyes, to see him as a person, and ask the difficult questions about what was going on in his life that allowed him to take someone else's. Initially, Katie made a video of the conversation that she felt that she needed to have with Ryan. She told him about her late husband and talked about how hard her new family had worked to counter their distress, fear, and anger that was associated with what Ryan had done. Now it was time for Ryan to address the affects he was experiencing because of his actions. After her video that Ryan viewed, he broke down and reiterated the confession made during the undercover investigation. Ryan asked to see his mother and to see Katie. 16 hours after his arrest, Katie came face to face with her husband's murderer. She encountered a young man who could have been her nephew, her younger brother, her neighbor, not the monster that she expected to see. Ryan sat slumped over, sobbing in a chair. It was all she could do not to give him a hug. She hated what he had done, but could also feel the ripple effect of the devastation his actions had in every direction. She told Ryan he should plead guilty so their families could avoid going through a trial. Ryan agreed. Not knowing what would happen to support Ryan's rehabilitation behind bars, Katie reached out to the Community Justice Initiative in Vancouver about facilitating a restorative process. 1 year into his sentence, they met again. Ryan told Katie he acted out of anger the night that he killed her husband. But during a follow-up meeting, Katie witnessed Ryan's shame. He talked about being bullied. He talked about his parents' divorce. He talked about the loss of a close friend in a drunk driving accident and not knowing how to grieve in a healthy way. He learned to manage shame by avoidance and attacking others. She hated what Ryan did, but could not hate the person. She wanted Ryan to create something good in his life. Offering her forgiveness to Ryan was her way of trusting he would do just that. Katie's forgiveness was a way of giving up hope for a better past and giving hope for a better future. It is what she would hope that someone would do for her children and for her. Katie learned that forgiveness is a dynamic process and that she needs to revisit it from time to time. Katie's forgiveness for Ryan was and is for her before anyone else. It freed her to give her family the best of herself. Katie now has a meaningful career teaching young people in schools around the world about the potential life-altering dangers of alcohol and drug use and the positive power of restorative practices. After engaging fully in a restorative process and serving his prison sentence, Ryan Aldridge joined Katie in her teachings. He believes that because of her forgiveness and the restorative work that they did together, he was able to avoid a downhill spiral into further drug and alcohol abuse and a life of shame avoidance behaviors. The chapter ends with this quote: "I believe the future of restorative practice lies in our educational system. If we raise children who learn to expect a restorative opportunity, to be made available to deal with harm, we will in turn create a generation of young adults who will instinctively build restorative structures within their families, communities, schools, workplaces, and governments. In closing, it has been said that forgiveness unlocks the door of resentment and removes the handcuffs of hate. And as I began this presentation, I've learned through my own personal experience of the power of forgiveness. And again, not only of forgiving others, but just as important is forgiving yourself for the mistakes that we've made. Thank you very much.